Hello again, seventh graders. Today, we're going to start off by reviewing the characteristics of living things. This is something you would have read about a couple days ago when you were doing the lesson outline on the characteristics of life, that textbook assignment from last week. So we're going to go over those again quickly today in this slideshow, and then I'm going to introduce you to the assignment that you're going to be working on today and tomorrow. So the big thing that we are trying to figure out here and learn about is what are the characteristics of all living things, or what characteristics do all of them share? Vocabulary that you're going to see here are words like organism, cell, unicellular, multicellular, and homeostasis. Hopefully by the time you're done with this assignment, after we've done the lesson outline, you've done the textbook reading, you've watched this video, hopefully those are going to be words that you're a little more familiar with, and you'll be a little more comfortable using in science. So first of all living things are organized. They have to grow and develop, reproduce, respond to their environment. They have to maintain certain internal conditions, and they have to use energy. That's just the listing of the 6 characteristics of living things in one sentence. Anything that has all of these characteristics is called an organism. Another definition for an organism is a living thing. So anything that has all the characteristics of living things, that's called an organism. So first, all living things are organized. They are all made of cells. A cell is the smallest part of any living thing, so the smallest unit of life. If something is just one cell, they're called unicellular. So for example, this critter down here by the cursor, that is a paramecium. That's a type of protist that has only one cell. Bacteria are another example of unicellular organisms. If something is made of 2 or more cells, they're called multicellular. So large animals like, lions, tigers, bears, elephants, humans, we are made of trillions of cells. And so we are considered multicellular. But even if something was only 2 cells, it would be considered a multicellular organism. Growth and development. All living things have to grow and develop. The word growth you are probably very familiar with. Growing is just getting bigger. Unicellular organisms, so something that's just one cell, they become larger by simply increasing their cell size. So their one cell gets bigger. If something is multicellular, it's going to grow by increasing the number of cells. So you would have started your life with less cells than you have now. You add more cells as you grow. Development, that is any changes that occur in something's lifetime. So for example, you are able to talk now, and you were not when you were a baby. You're able to walk and run now, and you weren't when you were first born. Those changes are examples of development in humans. In multicellular organisms, that development happens because cells are more specialized as they go through their lifetime. So they turn into different types of cells that allow the organism to become more developed and to do more complex things. Some organisms have developed dramatic developmental changes, like a tadpole turning into a frog. And so this is a picture out of the textbook that shows a tadpole here changes into a later tadpole, then to an adult, and of course it all started as an egg. So as it's gone through its lifetime, it's added more cells, become more complex, and gone through some very dramatic changes during its lifetime. Next, all living things have to reproduce. Reproduction is simply when one organism makes one or more new organisms, so making more of themselves. Some organisms can reproduce simply by dividing in half. Bacteria is a great example of this. When they have got enough nutrients and they are full grown, they'll just divide in half, and then they'll have 2 organisms that are identical. Some organisms, some living things, have to have a mate to reproduce. Others can reproduce without a mate. All living things have to respond to stimuli. So stimuli are any changes in their environment. And there's 2 main categories of stimuli. Internal stimuli are changes that happen inside of a living thing. External stimuli are changes in the environment of a living thing. So internal stimuli for us would be like hunger or thirst. Those stimuli make us go find food, go find water. Those would be examples of internal stimuli. external stimuli is going to be things like temperature. So when you are cold, your body starts to perhaps shiver. When you are warm, you're going to start sweating. That's external stimuli. If you flinch because of a loud noise, that would be an example of an external stimuli because that's a change in your environment. Homeostasis, big fancy science word here. That's an organism's ability to maintain steady internal conditions when the outside conditions change. And so your body temperature is a really good example of this. Your body temperature needs to stay around 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit or 37 degrees Celsius. If your body goes out too far from that temperature, then your body's going to have a hard time staying healthy and being able to do all the things that you need to do. But it also can mean other things. For example, it can have to do with the amount of water in your cells. So becoming dehydrated or becoming overhydrated can be things that affect the homeostasis in your cells. So as I mentioned already, homeostasis is going to allow your cells to remain healthy and function normally. If you aren't able to maintain homeostasis, then your cells will not be able to survive eventually. Another example besides just body temperature, in a lot of small living things, they have what's called a contractile vacuole. And these are part of their cells that allow them to remove extra water. So a lot of living things that live in the water have contractile vacuoles because they have to remove water from their cells and send it back out into their environment so they don't become overhydrated, because in some living things, they would absorb so much water that they eventually would burst. And so these contractile vacuoles prevent that from happening. They help the living thing maintain homeostasis. Lastly, energy. All living things continuously are using energy to transport substances, to make new cells, to perform chemical reactions. So, for example, you use energy when you're breathing. You are doing a chemical reaction in your body called cellular respiration. You're taking in oxygen from the air. You are using energy from food that you have eaten, which is turned into glucose, and it performs a chemical reaction that allows you to get energy into your cells. For most living things, energy comes from the sun, directly or indirectly. And the sun's energy can be passed from one living thing to another, which is what you can see when you see a food web. So this is a picture from the textbook that shows a desert food web. So we've got the sun up here. Its energy is represented with these arrows. So we have energy from the sun going to this big sagebrush plant. We have energy from the sun going to this desert paintbrush plant. We have it going over to this prickly pear cactus. And then when that is eaten by something else, the energy from the sun is transferred to whatever ate that plant. And so it becomes a complex web of that energy being passed from one living thing to another. You might notice up here that the bat and the mountain lion and the coyote do not have any arrows going to something else. That would be because they are a predator that you might say is at the top of the energy pyramid, or they are not going to have living things that are preying on them regularly. So here's a chart that summarizes the characteristics of living things. This can also be found in your textbook. It goes through and gives you a definition of all the characteristics. So this is something you could come back to, or like I said, you can find this in your textbook as well. Just a summary of these characteristics. So hopefully after this, if you had some resources to look at, you'd be able to talk a little bit about the characteristics that all living things share. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, Mr. Sexton, that was a ton of information you have just given us. So you're correct. This is a lot of new information. Some of it you may be familiar with, some of it you may not be. And so that's why we did the lesson outline last week, to get you familiarized with some of the vocabulary. That's why I had you watch that ed puzzle about the characteristics of living things, just so you could see some more examples. So this is the worksheet that's going to go with our next assignment. This is called Create an Imaginary Organism. So to start off with, I have listed on this chart the 6 characteristics of all living things. And I've given you a good chunk of the information that was in the PowerPoint that I just went through. And you can have that in the same place as this assignment, just as a reference. Sort of like some shortened notes that I put together for you. And so I'm not going to read over all of these because you've already heard me go through the PowerPoint, but this is on the front side of the worksheet for you to use as a reference. Now, as you look further down, here are the actual instructions for what I would like you to do in this assignment. On the next page, I would like you to create your own new organism or your own new living thing. I want you to make this up. This should not be a report on a lion. It should not be a report on a rabbit. I want you to make up your own. You can put multiple animals together, but please don't just like put a pig's nose on a bat. Okay, let's be more creative than that. Take different parts of living things and you can piece them together, or you can make something up of your own. This does not have to be an animal. Living things are plants, bacteria, fungus like mushrooms. There are unicellular things that just swim around in water and eat other unicellular living things. They're called protists. I want you to make up your own living thing. So I need you to come up with a name for your organism. I would like you to make a drawing of your organism in its environment using color. You may do your drawing on paper if that's easier for you. You can use a colored pencil, markers, or you could simply do it in Notability. You've got tons of color options there, and I'll show you some examples of what you can do in Notability. Then I would like you to write a paragraph about your imaginary organism and tell me about how it has all the characteristics of living things. And as I've got here, it says, here are some questions to think about as you're writing your paragraph. How is it organized? Is it unicellular or multicellular? That could be one sentence. How does it grow and develop? How big does it get? What does it look like? That could be another sentence or two. How does it reproduce? Does it reproduce on its own? Does it need a mate? Once it decides it's ready to reproduce, does it lay eggs? Does it have live young? Does it produce seeds? Does it just divide in half? How does it make more of itself? Next one, letter D. How does it maintain stable internal conditions? Does it have any special features to help it keep water in its body, like a thick outer shell? Or does it live in a shady environment? How does it keep its body temperature in a certain range? Does it have fur? Does it have a layer of blubber? Does it just have a thick layer of plant-like material? How does it maintain its stable internal conditions? Letter E, how does it respond to stimuli or changes in its environment? Does it run away if it's scared? Does it shiver if it's cold? Like, what does it do when there are stimuli around it that cause it to react? Lastly, letter F, how does it get and use energy? Can it make its own food like plants and some bacteria? Or does it have to eat like we do? Can it absorb nutrients through root-like structures like fungi do? If you've ever seen mold like growing on a piece of fruit, they are absorbing nutrients through those root-like structures that are growing into the orange. Now on the second page of this document, I've got a chart for you to use to organize this information. I've got a box at the top here, simply for you to put the name of your organism. It'd be really sweet if you could give it a common name and a scientific name, but we might come back to that later in the next lesson because that talks more about classification. I would like you to either make your drawing of your living thing in its environment. So yes, you need to show me some of the environment around it. You can make that drawing in Notability, or you can simply draw it on paper, color it, and then take a picture with your iPad and insert that into the document. Lastly, I would like you to write a paragraph for me that describes how your living thing has the 6 characteristics of life. And if you're going to do it on paper, you could do it on notebook paper, write it out, insert a photo here for me to look at. If you are just going to write on this in Notability, please use a text box so it's a little easier for me to read. If you would like to write it by hand, I'm going to switch over to Notability here and show you how to add lines to your worksheet.
So 7th graders, we're in Notability now, looking at the assignment. So if you scroll down to the second page, you've got the chart you're going to be filling out with the name of your organism and your drawing and your paragraph. I said I would tell you how to put lines in the background. Turns out Mr. Sexton can't figure out how to do that. So you'll need to use the text box, or if you know a way to put lines in the background, go ahead and do that yourself. I thought we could just change the paper background by tapping on these 3 dots and it would change, but that does not work for me. Maybe you know a better way to do this. One thing I do want to remind you though, when you are doing your drawing, please take some time, use the finer tipped pencil like I've got it set on now, choose the colors you want to use for your living thing, you know, make it a finer drawing like you were drawing actually with a pencil, okay, as you're drawing your critter. Do not draw me a drawing like this. Okay, let's put a little time and effort into it and not make it look like it was done with a big fat marker as fast as you possibly could do it. Okay, remember you can erase stuff you don't like and change the colors. Show me what your living thing actually does look like and where it would be found. Is it, you know, out in the desert? Is it in a forest? But again, we're not drawing this with big fat markers. Okay, change the pencil to a finer tip and let's make it look like you put a little bit of time and effort into it, because you're going to have today and tomorrow to work on this assignment for science class. All right, let me know if you've got any questions, and I will talk to you later.